Today we will be learning about vaginas.
So much about nothing.
So nasty.
Vaginas.
Salt down her.
Vaginas.
Okay.
I didn't realize that's it.
Menstrual cycle is kind of a complicated process. Can y'all hang with me here?
Keep it cool,
So
DJ.
there's 5 hormones you're going to have to know. You've heard of some of them probably. Estrogen, progesterone, FSH,
Gasoline.
LH, and finally a hormone called blah.
Blah.
Right now, it's not called blah. I can't think of it. It's
You hear that? Blah. Vagina.
Are these on the book?
It's vagina.
These are all in the book. They're all in chapter 19. One of them, this last one's from chapter 20. It's the hormone that the
Cortisol.
fertilized egg puts out.
Toxin.
HCG.
What page is that?
Human chorionic gonadotropin.
You know what page
HCG is on page 545.
545.
And it's the only thing I'm going to include from chapter 20. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone.
Heck yeah, it does.
And LH stands for luteinizing hormone. So all of these you need to understand what hormones are being released when, and that controls the uterine cycle. And it's good to know the uterine cycle. If you're a female, this is going on in you all the time, and if you're a guy, well, you'll probably be married one day or have a girlfriend who has this stuff going on, and you want to know what in the world's happening.
What's going on?
So, it all starts in the pituitary gland of the brain. So I'm going to draw the pituitary gland of the brain up here, and it kind of, it's got 2 sides to it, an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. But anyway, the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary sends out this hormone at the beginning of the cycle called FSH.
Look at them balls.
Follicle stimulating hormone.
Look at them balls.
And that follicle stimulating hormone feeds through the bloodstream. And it feeds in toward the ovaries. So I'm going to draw an ovary here. And here's a little fallopian tube.
Look at them balls.
Or uterine tube. Y'all remember what these little finger-like projections are called?
Really?
Fembrii. Very good. Very good. And then that leads to the uterus, which I'll draw over here. Here's the uterus. Kind of shaped like a little.
That looks like a triangle with an arm.
And of course, over here there's another ovary and fembrii.
Oh, look at another arm.
And here's the end of the
doing, the
uterus,
triangle,
and
man?
this tube here is the vagina.
A vagina.
Vagina. Here's the uterus. And then these are fallopian tubes. Or uterine tubes.
Oh my god.
And what's this thing over here called?
Ovary.
Vagina.
Ovary. Just so we know what everything is. What's the little opening into the uterus called? Do y'all remember that?
The rectum.
Nope.
Is it
The
cervix?
cleat.
Very nice, cervix. So, what happens is FSH at the beginning of the cycle is released by the pituitary gland. And FSH is a hormone, so it gets in the blood and it goes everywhere. But one of the places it goes is to the ovary. The ovary has cells inside it that react to the FSH. And those are the little cells that it shows right here, these primordial follicles. Those react to the FSH. And FSH is a signal to those, and one of those picks up the signal and starts growing larger. And so it goes through this cycle that you see here in time lapse going. See, it says time. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that it's going to take a whole 14 days for it finally to get to this large size and ovulate, where the egg, now that little thing in the middle, that's the egg. We call it the primary oocyte. That's the egg right there. But it's surrounded by a bunch of cells called follicular cells. And those follicular cells there, that's not one cell, that's many thousands of cells surrounding the primary oocyte. And they protect the primary oocyte, but they also squirt out a hormone of their own. And that hormone that they put out is called estrogen and progesterone. They put out both of these hormones. But at the beginning of the monthly cycle, they're putting out a lot more estrogen than progesterone. So what we say is these, so the FSH signal comes in, follicle stimulating hormone, and what it does is it stimulates one of those follicles to start developing. So it stimulates the development of a follicle. We call this whole thing a follicle. And every month in a woman's body, this is happening. The follicle gets larger and larger and larger. That's why they call it follicle stimulating hormone. Are you all with me so far? It's exciting, isn't it? So this follicle stimulating hormone tells this follicle to grow larger and larger and larger and larger. And as the follicle gets bigger, it squirts out this hormone,
It's a projector.
estrogen.
It's a projector.
And estrogen gets in the bloodstream and goes everywhere in the female's body. And estrogen instructs the female's body cells to grow in certain ways. Females will grow breasts. Females will put on more fat. The fat helps the woman during pregnancy. Causes all of the woman's voice to change and so forth. So estrogen is the female hormone that causes everything that happens when a woman goes through puberty. But another thing estrogen does is it goes to the uterus. And when the walls of the uterus pick up estrogen, they start to grow thicker. And so what's going to happen is the wall of the uterus is going to start growing thicker here. Thick uterine walls. Thick uterine walls. The walls just get thicker and thicker as they get more and more estrogen. And as this follicle gets bigger and bigger, more and more estrogen is released. You understand me here?
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? Estrogen tells the uterine walls to get thicker. Now, on about the 15th day of the cycle, when the estrogen levels get high enough, the pituitary is sensitive to that. And the pituitary will release another hormone called LH. LH stands for Luteinizing Hormone. That's this one. And And LH also feeds through the entire body, but the only thing that's really sensitive to LH is the follicle. And the LH tells the follicle to burst. Let me put a little cell in the middle of it. LH tells the follicle to burst open and squirt out the egg. And we call that ovulation. So LH is the signal to ovulate.
Ovulation.
And so that's what happens here. See, ovulation, the egg is being pushed out of the follicle. This whole thing right here is this thing right here. But it actually changes form. It changes color. It turns into this yellow structure here. All these cells on the outside that were putting out estrogen and some progesterone change form to this yellow color. And the rest of the follicle is going to become a new structure that we call the Corpus Luteum, which means yellow body in Latin. So now we have this yellow body. After ovulation, we have this yellow body in the ovary. So now this egg here can get fertilized by sperm. It's still got a bunch of cells surrounding it and protecting it, but when the sperm get to it, they're going to eat through all those cells with their enzymes. And they're going to eat through this layer here called the zona pellucida, and they'll eventually get into the egg. The outer layer of the egg, these outer protective cells are called the corona radiata, and this inner, harder membrane is called the zona pellucida. Those were on your ID sheets. Y'all remember those?
Mm-hmm.
Did everybody finish their ID sheet?
Yeah.
How good are you?
Really good.
Okay, so now we have this corpus luteum. The corpus luteum, which is this yellow body now, there's the corpus luteum right there, Cl. This yellow body here keeps squirting out hormones, and it keeps squirting out estrogen.
Your body is a wonderland.
But it also puts out a lot of progesterone. The corpus luteum squirts out a lot more progesterone than it does estrogen, and the follicle puts out a lot more estrogen than it does progesterone. And progesterone also can have effects like estrogen on the woman's body. But the other thing progesterone does is it feeds into the walls of the uterus here, and it stimulates blood vessel development. So blood vessels, I wish I had a red marker, but anyway, blood vessels will grow into the walls of the uterus and make it so the walls of the uterus have plenty of blood supply. All over here. Y'all, why do we want a thick uterine wall with a lot of blood supply?
So they have bigger babies.
So that the egg, if it's fertilized, and this fertilized egg will start traveling
so it can stretch
down here. And if that egg is fertilized by sperm, if the woman was having sex, the egg gets fertilized by sperm and continues down here. And if this wall is thick and full of blood vessels, then the fertilized egg will implant somewhere in the wall here, and be able to grow because it's got a blood supply. And it's got plenty of cushion there. It's a nice place to grow if you're a cell. Y'all see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's better cushion than no cushion.
Nah, mean?
Yeah.
That's do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure. Alright. Now, let's suppose that the woman was not having sex. I know that's a stretch in this day and age, but if she didn't have sex, what do you think is going to happen to the egg?
It's gonna go bye-bye.
It's gonna die.
It's not going to survive.
That was a little vicious. No.
And if that dies, the cycle will end. And the walls of the uterus will break down. And as the walls of the uterus break down, all these blood vessels break. And all the cells and the blood vessels will run out of the uterus through the vagina. That's what the woman's period is. That's what menstrual bleeding is. It's the walls of the uterus all running out. And it takes about 3 or 4 days or a week, depends on the person, for all this to clear out. And then the whole thing will restart. Now, if she did have sex, and you did get a fertilized egg, the fertilized egg will implant and start to grow into a baby. And it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that fertilized egg, when it implants, it sends out a hormone of its own. Its hormone that it sends into the body, can you guess what it's called?
HCG.
HCG.
Two.
Human chorionic gonadotropin. And that is the pregnancy hormone. That's a hormone that tells the body, specifically, it tells the corpus luteum to keep sending out progesterone and estrogen. Because we need to maintain a thick uterine wall. So think about this. If this thing is sending out the HCG tells this to keep sending out estrogen, progesterone, the uterine wall will stay thick, and the woman won't have a period. That's how most women know when they get pregnant. They don't have a period. That's my period sigh. If HCG is sent out, the corpus luteum will stay large. But if HCG is not sent out, that means they didn't get a pregnancy. That means the corpus luteum is not getting any signal to stay large, and the corpus luteum will automatically get smaller, and it will degenerate into this structure right here, which is called a corpus albicans, which means white body. And a corpus albicans doesn't put out any hormones. And eventually that corpus albicans just gets smaller and smaller and disappears. If you don't have estrogen and progesterone being put out by the corpus luteum, there's no signal for the walls of the uterus to stay thick. The walls of the uterus will break down. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. I know you mean.
Questions? It's kind of a complicated process, isn't it? You probably know more about it now than most females out there know.
No doubt. You think?
I bet your mom doesn't know about all this. Ask her about it.
I bet she does.
Ask her if she knows how the menstrual cycle works. That'd be a
She
good dinner
does.
conversation.
She's good.
Great dinner conversation.
She knows she's
Yeah.
talking
Yes.
I'll try it.
Teach my little brother.
Say it as you're eating a very rare steak.
It's not.
Mom, how's the menstrual cycle work?
Let's see. What's this video about?
Does your body your blood vessels move?
Do you get terrible?
A primordial follicle consists of an oocyte surrounded by a single layer of squamous granulosa cells. A primordial follicle becomes a primary follicle as the granulosa cells become enlarged and cuboidal. The primary follicle enlarges, and the granulosa cells form more than one layer. The zona pellucida forms around the oocyte. The structure is called a secondary follicle when fluid-filled vesicles develop among the granulosa cells and a well-developed capsule, or theca, becomes apparent around the granulosa cells. The theca possesses internal and external layers. The structure is called a mature follicle when the fluid-filled vesicles form a single antrum. At full maturity, the oocyte is located in the cumulus mass. During ovulation, the oocyte is released from the follicle, along with some surrounding granulosa cells of the cumulus mass, called the corona radiata. Following ovulation, the granulosa cells divide rapidly and enlarge to form the yellow corpus luteum. When the corpus luteum degenerates, it forms the white corpus albicans.